Hey everybody, Andy Morrison from Real Custom Training, welcoming you back to the Better Workdays podcast. This is the show that gives you free, fast, and actionable advice on how to use leadership skills to create better workdays for yourself and for the people around you. Now, the best part of that, let's say you try to only create better workdays for yourself using some of the things you learn about on this podcast. If you do that, you will inevitably contribute to better workdays for the people around you. And the reverse is true. If you try to only create better workdays for the people around you, you'll end up creating them for yourself too. It's reciprocal in nature. What's good for you is good for them and vice versa. That's the beautiful part about leadership and personal development. It helps you and it helps everyone around you. Now, this week, I want to talk about freedom. We just had 4th of July here in the United States of America. I'm sure that's not news to you. I'm putting that in here mostly for our producer, Benners, who from Piccolo Podcast based in Sydney, Australia, where, believe it or not, in Australia, they don't have 4th of July. They don't have Thanksgiving either. It's unbelievable. They're missing out. And with 4th of July comes a lot of talk about freedom. And over the 4th of July holiday, I was on vacation. My wife and I took the kids to the most magical place on earth. No, not that one. The other one. Santa's Village in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. I have an episode coming up on leadership lessons from Santa's Village, which I'm very excited about. But while we were up there in Santa's Village country, I was reading some leadership and management books and some crime fiction too. I like to mix it up. But as I was reading some leadership and management books, something struck me about them. It was that freedom is very much at the heart of leading people in the workplace. I think you could argue that leadership is freedom management. A big part of your job, if you're a boss, you know it, a big part of your job is determining how much freedom to give to the employees whose jobs you're overseeing. And in a lot of ways, when we talk about leadership, we're talking about freedom, but we don't call it freedom. That's the part that really jumped out at me, was that, oh, freedom's kind of at the core of a lot of this, but you never really see that word. You know, I pulled some books off the shelf behind me today just to test this theory. And I went to the index in quite a few of them, and I looked for the word freedom in the index, and it doesn't appear. You know, what does appear are words like empower, words like discretion, authority. When we talk about things like hand-holding or micromanaging, those are all different terms for freedom or different ways to think about managing freedom in the workplace. But rarely do we call it freedom. And so it got me thinking about, oh, that's interesting that, it's such a core part of it. We don't really use that term, but freedom is very much, very much obviously an American thing, but it's also very much a leadership thing. You could really think of leadership as freedom management. So what I wanted to do is talk about why freedom is such a big part of leadership. And that's because it's something that every employee needs and every employee wants to some degree. That's never going to go away. If you are the boss of people, you are always and forever going to be managing their need for freedom. So this week's episode is intended to help you manage that challenge. And so we're going to talk about why employees need freedom and how to give them more of it without losing control. And when it comes to how to give them more of it, I'm going to give you some practical advice that I learned from some of my students recently. Not just stuff from the books that I'm reading, but stuff that came right from the real world, right from folks primarily in insurance and in manufacturing. Some tips that they use to give freedom without necessarily giving up total control over some projects. So before we get to the practical advice, let's talk about the why behind it all. Why is freedom entangled in leadership? Why are you always going to be forever managing freedom to some degree if you're a leader of any kind? Well, check out what's on the screen. I got the 6 core needs for you. Are these my 6 core needs? Yes, they are. But they're also yours, and they're also everyone you work with. These are the 6 core needs of every person who's ever walked the planet, every person who came before us, every person who's going to come after us. These are what they consider the 6 core psychological needs of the human animal. And when you talk about things like this that are kind of a universal truth about people, about human beings, where demographics go out the window, um, doesn't matter what era you're born in, what country you're born in, what political party you belong to, what your gender is, what your sexual orientation is. None of that matters. Everybody is driven in varying degrees, the theory goes, to these 6 core needs. And for those of you who are fans of the podcast, thank you. And you, the what I call the B-dubbers, the hardcore Better Work Days listeners, you right now probably look like that Leonardo DiCaprio meme from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I believe, which I still haven't seen. But where he's leaning forward and he's pointing at the TV because he recognizes something. You're doing that right now because you're saying, hey, wait a minute, Andy, you did a whole episode on this. You are correct. We have an entire episode that dives a bit deeper into these 6 core needs. I'm going to put the title image up for that episode. So go back into the Better Work Days playlist, the live playlist. Look for this title page, and you can go watch that episode if you want a deeper dive into the 6 core needs. But right now, I'll give you kind of a surface level look at them. Real quick, 6 core needs for all people: identity, safety, care, autonomy, growth, and stimulation. We'll start with identity. That's basically, we all have the need to have some personal identity, and we need to live in a way that doesn't contradict it. So in the workplace, this can come into play. If you pride yourself as an honest person, basically identity, what kind of person are you? Who are you? If you pride yourself as being honest and that's part of your identity, then if your boss asks you to lie to their boss or lie to a customer, and all of a sudden you're in conflict with your boss, that's because they've asked you to do something that's not congruent with your identity. It's one of your core needs. We all have to live in a way. And so, obviously there's a give and a take here. Sometimes we all do things that don't match our identity, but when we do things that don't match it, we usually don't feel that good about it. That's because it's a core need to have the identity and live in accordance with it. The second one is safety. Now, I should say before I talk about safety, when you have these universal truths about human beings, the reason things like this exist is that they served a purpose in our evolution as a species. So all 6 of these things, I won't go too deep into this, but all 6 of these things at some point helped us survive as a species, helped us take over planet Earth, helped us survive and procreate. All 6 of these things. And when way back when, these things helped us so much that the need for them got hardwired into the computer that we all carry up in our skull. They got hardwired into our brains, and we carry them today, even though they were formed in us so long ago. That makes sense, especially when you think of safety, right? Of course, if it's all about survival and procreating, then of course safety is important, physical safety. Safety can also mean, and especially in the workplace, you may have heard the term psychological safety. So yes, your workplace, there's the expectation and the need that you're going to be kept physically safe. There's also the expectation and the need that you're psychologically safe, meaning you can kind of be yourself. Again, back to that identity part, it ties in. You can be who you are. You can have opinions that are your own. You're not going to be in trouble for sharing them. You can take risks without getting in trouble. That's especially important these days when everyone likes to talk about innovation. Well, if you're telling people to innovate, but you're taking their heads off when they take a risk or try something new, then you're probably not going to have very innovative employees because safety is a core need. 3 is care. You could also think of this as connection. Basically, people need to be connected and feel like they belong to each other, belong to a group. 4, autonomy, right? There's one of those words. That's the freedom part. You could put, instead of autonomy, you can just think of that as freedom. The power or the freedom to choose how, where, and with whom we work. In the workplace setting, that's how it fits. Out in the rest of the world, it's, how, where, and with whom we live. But in the workplace, it's, you want some say in what work you're doing, where you're doing it, what time you're doing it. If you don't think freedom is a core need that can have a lot of implications in the workplace, well, just take a look at the battle at times, the battle over work from home and work home, flexibility, schedule flexibility, and all that stuff that COVID really brought to the forefront. And now there's been a bit of a struggle for folks that want to have that flexibility and companies that feel like they can't afford to give them that flexibility. That's essentially a battle over freedom. 5 is growth, the need to progress, to have goals, achieve goals, and receive some acknowledgement for those goals. Don't sleep on the acknowledgement part. Actually, we should do an episode just on that, how important that is. And then 6, the 6th core need, stimulation. You need intrigue, you need challenge, you need interesting pursuits. Now, you may say, Andy, I'm just I'm a salt of the earth supervisor. I don't, do I really need to know 6 core psychological needs? Do I need to get this deep about it? I think you do. And I'll tell you what, I think one, you don't have to get that deep about it. You give me 20, 30 minutes today. I'll give you a decent takeaway with it. Maybe you don't even need to go much deeper than that, although I encourage you to. But the reason I bring this to your attention and I share this in my workshops and I teach people about these things is because for bosses out there, right? How many times as a boss have you been told by your boss that you need to be motivating people? You got a low performing employee or a low performing team, and it comes back on you. Hey, what are you doing to motivate them? Well, okay. If motivation is important for leaders, then these 6 core needs are important to leaders because these 6 core needs are basically 6 core motivators of people. And here's the secret, or not really a secret, more I guess you could think of it as the tragedy. You actually can't motivate anybody. You can't motivate anybody. You can't control anybody. Despite what people tend to think about being someone's boss, the fact is your boss has no control over you, and they cannot motivate you. They can influence you, and they can influence your motivation, but your motivation comes from within. Motivation is internally driven. Even extrinsic, I did say that correctly, extrinsic motivators like a pay raise or a bonus or a vacation. You think of those as things that motivate you, but still the choice to be motivated by those things, to pursue those things, comes from within. Ultimately, it always comes from within. Motivation has to come from within the individual. Motivation is an inside job. I don't know who said that. I think somebody in leadership development said that, but it's true. It's an inside job. So if you think of these as the 6 core motivators, then let's talk about how it applies to employee retention. All right, I was talking to someone recently. I won't say who because I don't want to say who, but I was talking to someone recently and they were telling me that they had just done a performance review with one of their employees. All right. For this person, they want to retain this employee. They like this employee. It's a high-performing employee. They don't want them jumping ship. They want them to be at their organization for, years to come. And this employee said to them, well, I like working here. I like the people. So that gives you some indication about that connection piece. Okay, they value the connection. And then they said, and I would stay here, but I don't know if I would stay if I'm going to continue to be in this particular role. And it was because the person found the role that they're in kind of boring. Just didn't really care for the work itself. But they saw and they identified other areas in the organization that they thought maybe they would be more interested in, that they could really thrive in rather than just get by. So right there, okay, I like the people here, but when I think about leaving, it's mostly because I find the work boring. You got an employee telling you that, an employee you want to keep, that is a big indication that they're driven by number 3 on this list, by care, and by number 6, by stimulation. That it's really important to them not to be bored at work. I'm kind of wired that way too. I physically can't be bored. It makes me ill. Some people though, it's like when you're wired that way, it's hard to imagine that some people aren't that way. But I know some people, I have friends and family, people I know who they don't necessarily need to be that stimulated by the work itself, especially people I know who have really rich lives outside of work. Let's say you're like you like jumping out of airplanes, right? And your seemingly boring 9-to-5 job affords you this wild, extravagant lifestyle you have outside of work. Might make it a little bit easier to do with a lack of stimulation in the workplace, right? Everyone's wired a little differently. But in the scenario I laid out, if someone says, yep, I might leave because I find the work boring, well, then that tells the boss, all right, I know which of the core needs are really driving this person. I'm going to tailor my approach to retaining them based on that. I had someone in a workshop when I asked them, what do you think you're most driven by on this list? And they said, I think safety, because the most important thing to me is job security and my steady paycheck. And I said, yeah, that jives. That makes sense to me. That would be safety. So that person's boss, if they try to retain them by offering them a promotion that would come with less job security, That's the wrong way to go about it. You got to get to know the person to know which of these are driving them, because we all have these to some degree. Where we're going to differ is the degree to which we're driven by these individual needs or a combination of them. You might be driven by growth and safety most of all, or as I said before, care and stimulation. And the only way to get to know these things about your employees is to talk to them. Unless you can think of another way, please tell me if you think of another way to determine which of these are really driving your employee other than to have conversations with your employee. Now, obviously, with number 4 on the list, autonomy, that's where freedom's going to be the most important. And when we talk about micromanaging a freedom problem. If you've got employees pushing back on you and you hear that they have labeled you a micromanager, that means your employees feel as though you are not giving them the level of freedom that they believe they deserve, and that some might argue they really need. Now, to be fair, am I saying you should give 100% autonomy to all of your employees over their work? Of course not. All right. Despite what you might read on LinkedIn, I would not suggest that. And what you would read on LinkedIn from others, not from me. I'm a big believer in situational leadership. Okay. If someone comes through the door who's brand new and they don't quite know what they're doing yet, then you need to quote unquote micromanage them. You need to use the tell style of leadership of, hey, here's what you need to do. Here's how you do it. The problem with micromanaging is when people apply that style to someone who doesn't need it. So you've got an employee who's been there a few months. They now know what they're doing. They don't need you holding their hand anymore, but you continue to hold their hand. Then you are truly becoming a micromanager. And the reason it's such an issue is that micromanaging denies people the basic human need for freedom, for some control over what work they're doing, how they're doing it, when they're doing it, who they're doing it with, all that good stuff. It's a freedom issue. Micromanaging is depriving people of freedom that they believe they deserve. And that is why it can become such an issue in the workplace. And it's why you can lose really good people if they're being micromanaged inappropriately, because they will go somewhere else. Like I said, this is big with retention. If you look at anyone you know, or maybe even yourself, someone who has left a job that they liked. Okay, I left a job that I liked before, and it was a tough decision. What did it come down to? All right. I left an employer in Massachusetts, Vocational Technical High School, BVT, go Beavers. I left the BVT to go work for Quinebaug Valley Community College. Why? Well, at Quinebaug Valley Community College, I saw more opportunity for advancement. Growth was a big part of it. And also some safety. And in that sense, it meant more of being closer to home because, and it tied into identity. I really worked in Massachusetts, but I considered myself a Northeastern Connecticut guy. I was big and active in the community through volunteer stuff. So the idea of being able to both work in my community at the community college while also continuing to volunteer in my community felt like a better fit to my identity. Just a couple of reasons. But so my point is, oftentimes, when people leave a job that they like, where they like the people, they like the work, there's nothing to really complain about, yet they still leave. I bet you will be able to identify that there were one or more of these 6 core needs that they were able to get at the new place that they weren't able to get at the other place, despite how much they liked it. And that's probably due to systemic reasons. Sometimes people need growth opportunities, but the organization they're working in, for any number of reasons, simply can't provide that many growth opportunities. Sometimes people find they really need stimulation, but the organization might not be able to provide it. Maybe some work by its very nature is more monotonous and routine than other types of work. So for bosses out there, especially, you higher level folks, I would encourage you to think about which of these 6 core needs does your organization naturally give its people, and which ones do you kind of naturally are you naturally unable to give your people to a high degree? For example, stimulation, like I said, if you've got people doing monotonous work, and okay, our work itself is not very stimulating, there's not much we can do to make it more stimulating. So if you're going to have a hard time really delivering on core need number 6, then it might behoove you to make sure, well, hey, let's make sure we've got a great culture because we want people we want to meet the need for connection. Let's make sure we're giving people advancement opportunities so that even if you don't like the monotonous work, maybe hey, for those of you that want to and put the work in and develop yourselves, 2-3 years, growth opportunities present themselves, and there's more stimulating work at another level. Whatever it might be, you got to consider where you are naturally able to fulfill these and where you are naturally unable to fulfill them, and try to balance that out and try to play to the strengths of your organization. Now, freedom, all right? The autonomy, the power to choose how, where, and with whom we live and work. Here's what I've learned about that in my workshops. A lot of the time, I think we make the mistake of thinking about freedom as an all or nothing proposition. Meaning, well, I can't fully delegate that task, so I better keep it on my plate. Or, oh, I delegated it. I tried to give the person some freedom over it, but they screwed it up, so I took the task back and put it back on my plate. So, or it might be that, there's things that you simply can't allow someone to have total freedom over. If you're in a manufacturing environment, your employees may not be able to be given the freedom of deciding what's being made that week, what parts are getting made, right? The orders are driving that. The customer demand is driving that. So here's what I've learned. Let me show you a picture. I learned a lot of this recently from these folks: Jennifer, Tina, Doreen, Becky, Mike Muzzy, and Dylan. These are folks, they just graduated Level Up Leadership. That's why they have those beautiful plaques. They did 56 hours of work with real custom training, developing their leadership skills. And we talked about freedom. And what we talked about was this basic scale, very basic scale for the level of freedoms that you can provide your employees. At the lowest level, the lowest amount you can provide is when you decide everything alone. You go to the employee and you say, here's the work you got to do. Here's how you do it. Go get it done. They've got no say in it. You're completely deciding. Very low level of freedom for your employee. Next up, you decide, but with some input. You say, hey, here's the, here's the work you could do, or here's the work I need you to do. How do you think you should go about getting it done? Or when do you think you could get it done by? You get their input on a few things, but then you still make the decision. You still tell them, okay, I heard you. Here's how I want you to do it. And I want it done by this date. But at least they had some input. The next level up, you and your employee decide together. You don't make the final decision. You make a final decision with them. You have to agree on it. They've got the input and they get to help come up with the final decision. And then the last level, the leader lets the employee decide. That's what, the traditional definition of delegate is basically when you let the employee decide and completely run with the ball, handle every aspect of it. So what I have found is that sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that we're either at that first level where we have to decide everything, or we're at the other level where we're letting the employee take the ball and fully run with it and make all their own decisions. And what the folks in my leadership development program helped me see is that, oh, no. Within any task, within any project, you can operate within any of these levels. So one thing that they told me was if they had, let's say they had 3 jobs and they've got an employee that can handle all 3 of them, and the employee doesn't get any say in what the 3 jobs are, maybe doesn't have any say in what the deadline is. The boss is making those decisions on their own. But when they go to that employee and they tell them, here's the 3, they may say within that, let's give them some freedom. You pick the 3. Or maybe say they don't let them pick the 3. The boss decides, here's the job I need you to do. But within that, they might decide, I'm going to give you the freedom. You tell me the deadline. When can you get it done by? Or you tell me the best method of doing it, and that's the way we'll get it done. So the thing they helped me realize is that it doesn't need to be all or nothing. Give people freedom when and where you can. Because ultimately, you will get more out of employees the more freedom you give them. But they have to earn it. You can't give the new person off the street who doesn't know what they're doing yet total freedom and autonomy. It probably won't work. They need to learn first, and they need to earn the freedom and autonomy so that you can trust them to go off and work on their own and get things done. But in his book, Paul Hersey, here's his model, the effective success model. In his book, he makes a great argument for why you essentially want to give your employees more freedom incrementally until you're at that top level of, hey, you can decide. You can decide on your own. And his point was, if you're the leader and you've got to influence a follower, you need to influence them to build 10 widgets for you. Well, you could tell them, build the 10 widgets or you're fired. Okay. And that may be a success. They may get the 10 widgets built. But what if you had said, I'm going to tell you how to build the 10 widgets. I'm going to kind of hold your hand and micromanage you. But as soon as you've shown me that you can build them on your own, I'm going to let you go. And then you can build the 10 and let's see how many more you can build. You get them building those 10, then you go. Instead of hand holding them, you develop another person. You've got them building 10 widgets too. Now you're making 20 instead of 10. So his argument and the example he used for the effective success model was that micromanagement, severely limiting the amount of freedom that you give an employee is probably going to get you success in the short term. You'll probably get those 10 widgets built. But if you're a leader and you're thinking long-term and big picture and trying to maximize productivity and output, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense to micromanage. You want to give people incremental freedom as they earn it so that eventually you don't spend as much time on them in their work and you can get somebody else up to speed so that you're making double, triple, however many more widgets you would be if you were micromanaging. So the last lesson I learned recently was from the folks at Loose & Co. in Pomfret. And on the topic of freedom, one area you can't really give a lot of freedom is things like safety. You need compliance. It's not a, hey, if you deem it appropriate, follow the safety procedures, right? It's, hey, no ifs, ands, or buts. Kind of, turn your brain off. When it comes to this, all of our opinions are secondary to the fact that we need compliance on safety. You need to just follow the safety rules. You need to wear the safety glasses, things like that. You need, as a boss, compliance on that stuff. That's where you actually do want to restrict the freedom and just say, nope, compliance is the way to go. We want and demand compliance. And the way someone at Loose & Co. put it to me, they said, yeah, maybe it's that we require compliance, but we strive for commitment. And the way you get commitment is to build up freedom in people. So compliance versus commitment in a safety sense would mean if you've got an employee who doesn't want to wear their safety glasses, you need that compliance. You need them to put the safety glasses on. You get them to start doing it. Every day they show up, they're putting those safety glasses on. You've got compliance. Now, if along the way, you're talking to them, coaching them up, talking to them about the importance of the safety rules, the values of it, if you can get them on board with that idea, and you see them one day not just complying, but spreading that mindset in the organization. Maybe you see the employee who used to give you such a hard time about putting on safety glasses, you see them stop someone else and say, hey, you got to get your safety glasses on. We got to keep you safe. It's a rule here. You got to do it. When you see something like that, that is when you know you've actually cultivated commitment in them. So don't stop at compliance was kind of the takeaway I got from the folks at Loose & Company who taught me this. You require compliance, but you don't stop there. You get the compliance and then you strive for the commitment. That is a surefire way to know you are being more than just a boss. You're being a leader when you require compliance, but strive for commitment. So I appreciate my students, Jennifer, Tina, Doreen, Becky, Mike, Dylan, for helping me learn with them. I learned so much from the people in our workshops, and I appreciate the folks at Loose & Company too for helping me learn this nugget. We require compliance, but we strive for commitment. Man, that's leadership right there. All right, everybody, that's it for Better Workdays this week. I'm Andy Morrison. I will see you next time.